Hi guys, listen, I'm sorry, but I don't know, I've got internet connection problems here. I just switched off in the middle of nowhere. I was still talking and then I just saw reconnecting. So I don't know if just the internet must reconnect or whether I need to reconnect. So let me know if thank you, Warda. You know, Warda, you must help me out here. I'm like talking to this camera and here suddenly I just see reconnect, and they all my people disappeared. Okay, so apologies for that. I really don't know what is happening. I'm supposed to have a good internet connection here, but I don't know. I really don't know what is happening. Thanks, Alistair, for coming back. Really sorry for that. I'm having problems on this side. I don't even want to waste your time telling you that I'm operating here, like I said, with a light that my son put here because they're busy fixing something in the house. Oh my word, they put the light on. Okay, thanks. So thanks, what you're up. We see you. Thank you, what. I see you too. I see you on my screen. No, not literally on my screen. I just see your name there. Let me just put this in before we pick up on our topic again, which is about reading. I believe one of the school guys was lying on his bed, and when I greeted him because he came online, he got such a fright because he thought I can actually see him, physically see him. Now, I just want to tell people I can't see you. I'm sort of just looking into the camera and hoping, I sort of visualizing or something behind the camera, but I can't see into your house. It's not that kind of, I don't think we've advanced to that level in terms of technology yet. Well, not in my house anyway. So thanks for joining us. I'm just going to repeat what I said in the earlier one. We're going to talk about reading. We know we have a national reading crisis here in our country, but we're not going to go into depression now about it, right? We know our results, our children's reading ability is pathetic. It's bad. It's really just horrendous thinking about the fact that most of our children can't comprehend what they're reading. Most of them can't understand what they're reading. And how do we know this? You know that because you are busy teaching the children at school. So you experiencing that where children can't read or understand what they are reading. They can decode, but they can't read for meaning. In other words, they can sort of they know the words and, they can sort of just chorus the words, but they can't really make sense of what they're reading. And that was also that information or that knowledge that we have about the fact that our kids are not understanding what they're reading, that was proven again now in the polls 2016, where the results show that 78% of our grade 4s can't read for meaning. They don't understand what they're reading. And that is a hard pill to swallow, because those very kids, the grade 4s, have spent at least 4 years receiving formal teaching. Okay, so they've actually been in our schools and they are being taught. So they are being taught reading, but the reading instruction that they are receiving is obviously problematic. There must be gaps, there must be flaws in the way we're teaching the children to read. Okay, and I know that reading, the reading crisis that we have it's a highly complex issue. So it's not only about what they're doing at school, although we're going to focus on that now, but we know that the children, especially our children the poor children come from areas where there are major socioeconomic issues. We know the parents are not really involved in their education. So we know about those external issues that are impacting on the way the learners perform at school. But more critically is the fact that the learners are in our classes, right? And those grade 4s were in our classes for 4 years at least. And given the fact that we're teaching reading to the children, we are giving them reading instruction. When they sat for that international benchmarking assessment called the Pearls, we were all shocked. I'm sure you were all shocked as well when we saw that 78% of our learners can't read. So we need to ask ourselves, so what is happening in the classroom? Because the classroom is the site of struggle, really. Okay, just allow me to greet the people who came on board again. Hi, Colleen, nice to have you here. It's stunning. And then, of course, Alfreda joined the game. Thank you, Alfreda, my regular. So, so the big question is, how is reading being taught at the school? And the current research on reading is quite interesting. Now, perhaps you have your favorite researchers that you follow, right? Now, I like to read everything that Dr. Nick Spall writes about that. I think he's an expert, he's an economic researcher, but his focus is education. He looks at the economy and in relation to, or the education in relation to the economy and so forth. So he sees the connection between labor and education. And so because there's so much, such a passion for education, he's on top of his game in terms of the research. He's the researcher himself. He writes a blog. He runs a blog, and if you want to read up on reading and all the current research, I would strongly recommend the blog by Nick Spall, because he gives us the information, the current research. He'll give it to us in user-friendly language. It's not the jargon of like research papers. You can actually understand what he's saying, and it helps you understand what our challenges are. So according to the latest research that you have about reading, the whole question is about, the whole focus is on how are we teaching reading, how are we promoting reading instruction at our schools. And so we have to ask the questions about what is happening in the class and how are the teachers teaching reading in the class. Then we also have to ask the question about what is the SMT's role in terms of promoting reading instruction at the school, and is the SMT ensuring that there's a systematic, sustained program of reading instruction at the school. Because the research is saying that the SMT plays a crucial role in ensuring that the reading instruction is high on the school's agenda. It mustn't be incidental. It must actually be a whole school, a school-wide program in terms of teaching the children to read. Okay, so those are the things that the research is saying. What the research also picked up is that most of the teachers internationally, not only in South Africa, most of us haven't been taught how to teach reading. There's that whole approach or a sort of a viewpoint that reading is a natural process, and reading is not a natural process. Our brains are not wired for reading. Our brains are wired for talking. And that is why we are able to speak, because we hear everybody speaking around us. And so we are able to speak very well sometimes, but you can't equate a good speaker and just say, because that person is a good speaker, that person is therefore a good reader. There is not that link between the spoken word and the printed word. And because our brains are not wired, that is what neuroscience is also supporting. The fact that we are not naturally inclined to know how to read intuitively. We must be taught how to read. Okay? Because we talk, now all the spoken words, everything that we say, when it appears on paper, when it appears in print, then we use certain symbols to represent the sounds that we are making, the words that we are saying. So it's not automatic when you say the word, say you say my name, Sharon. Sharon has to be transcribed by using symbols when it appears on the page. And so how will I be able to identify what that spoken word is? How will I be able to recognize that spoken word on the page? Are you with me? So we have to, according to the research, there should be a lot of emphasis on, especially in the early grades, there must be a lot of emphasis on phonics. So children must be taught, when they are taught to read, they must be taught the sounds, and they must show the link between the sounds, the way we speak, and what it looks like on paper. And so they have to make that connection. So they must be able to, whatever sounds, and that particular sound will have a certain letter pattern. And so how does the child recognize that? And we know how complicated words are. Words consist of a number of letter patterns. So you just say the word dinner, but what does the word dinner look like on a page, in a text, in a story, in a book? And so that's a highly complex, process. It's not automatic. I'm just thinking of an example. One of the schools, it's in Shona, one of our schools in our district. And when the principal phoned, I greeted and I said, "Good morning, the leader of in Shona." And he said, "No, Sharon. It's not in Shona. It's in Shona. In Shona." And I spent about, say, 2 minutes just trying to pronounce the name of the school. And I'm an adult. So it makes absolute sense to me that when you're dealing with small children or young children, what we think is a very easy process is in fact a very, very difficult process. It's like riding a bicycle. It's not automatic. So the children, when they are speaking, they now have to see, okay, those words that I'm using, what do they look like on print? So they can't just look at the word and automatically make that connection. We must tell them, decode it for them, and show them that those letter patterns that you see there, that is how you pronounce it. Shh, or that is the ah, or that's the ooh in this word, whatever. The experts like Waters on the live chat will be able to tell us more. But the research is saying that if we want to change the reading, the illiteracy, if we want to help our children to become competent, proficient readers, we have to spend the bulk of our time on teaching phonics. And with the phonics, of course, the research is also asking, what do teachers understand, or do they know the various components of reading? Do we know that there are 5 components of reading? For example, do we know that phonics is one component? Do we know that vocabulary building is another component? Do we know that comprehension is the core or the key skill? Do we know that fluency is a component of reading? And do we know that there must be a level of motivation on the child's side, getting the child engaged? And those 5 components work together. So the research is not saying you must only teach phonics, you must only decode. The research, the way I understand it, and that's where I want my colleagues who are experts in this area to give some input. The research is saying that phonics must form the basis of early grade reading, right? So the children need to see the link between the sounds that we're making and the words as they appear in print. And once they see that connection, they need to see the meaning of that word. So we can't divorce the meaning of the word from, just teach how to pronounce the word. No, we must also explain the meaning of the word. That is what I'm picking up. It's very interesting, but I can understand why we're struggling like that, because as a teacher, a past teacher, classroom teacher, I'm learning a lot about now when I look at the research, I say, we weren't trained like that. And that's another thing the research is saying. Internationally, teachers haven't been trained on how to teach reading. There's just this assumption that we all know how to read, and because reading is seen as a natural process, we will just find our way and help the children, get the children to read. And now there's such a whole body of research, scientific research, which says that reading is not a natural process. It has to be taught. And when we're teaching our young children, we must start teaching them on how to do the phonics first. Okay, so I'm just going to pause it for a while to see who's on here. Hi, Janita. Thanks for coming on. You missed when we were cut off so badly. Shireen Cookson also joined. Thanks, Shireen. Thanks for coming along. Lovely to have you here. And Taryn Lee Christians. Hi, Taryn. Nice to see you here as well. And then I want to, you guys must give me some input because I thought I'll just kickstart the conversation about reading, okay? Because we have this major challenge, this major crisis in the country, and we can't continue the way we are doing things. We need to interrogate our practices at school. We need to ask ourselves, how much knowledge do we really have about reading? Do we really understand, how children learn to read? Because if we don't have that conceptual understanding, then we're going to fall back on the way we were taught, and we will fall back on what other people are showing us, how they are doing things. But we can see now we may be doing a lot of things, but there's no systematic program to show us how to read, or to show the children how to read. Okay, let me see if we have any comments here. Taryn Lee for the hi Taryn. Taryn says brilliant topic you're sharing. Taryn, you must join in on the conversation. I'm just sort of being like, starting the conversation. And then Alistair says very informative. Thank you, Alistair. Reading to understand is also a challenge, says Taryn. Children sometimes read only because they must. No, for sure. And I think, Taryn, you're just touching on one of the components of reading, because according to the research, those 5 components, I don't know if I mentioned it here or in the previous sort of misfiring of our session, I mentioned that there are 5 components according to the research of reading, and those 5 components work together. You can't really tackle them. You must tackle them in isolation, obviously, but you must draw the connection all the time between those 5 components. And according to the research, the 5 components is 1, phonics, which the research says is actually where we must start teaching reading in our foundation phases. Phonics must form the basis. It's really the bedrock of starting to get the children to read. Then vocabulary is very important, so spelling, learning new words is very important. Comprehension is critical. That ultimately, at the end of the day, the idea to get the children to read is to be able to understand what they are reading, and to make sense of what they are reading, and to start interrogating the text that they are reading, so that eventually they can give their opinions about what they are reading. They can analyze what they are reading. They can interpret what they are reading, So comprehension is critical. And then, of course, the 4th component is fluency, and the last one is the motivation, which you just touched on, Taryn, where then, the level of motivation also plays a key role. So if we're teaching reading, we need to understand that those are the 5 components of reading, and we need to understand, according to the research, that phonics must be taught in a deliberate way. It mustn't be incidental. I'm going to teach a bit of phonics. It must actually be a large part of the reading program, the reading instruction program at the schools in your foundation phase. Okay? What I wonder if you'd like to comment, and even Alfreda, because those are our language specialists here on the chat. Okay. So Wanda says, love the topic. Perhaps let's think about how we learn to read. Yes, that's interesting, how we learn to read, and what methods teachers used at the time. But if I recall from my own experience as a youngster, we did lots of spelling. We had to read books, but I think we did a lot of phonics. I can't remember what maybe you can, but I think we were sort of almost forced to read a lot. We had to spell. We got all those spelling tests all the time. We had to, I was at Harmony Primary School. We were even forced to learn new words. And then, you had to learn a few new words every week or every month. I can't recall. But those were some of the things that we learned, So according to the researchers that, internationally teachers haven't been trained. The training colleges treat reading as they treat it incidentally. They don't actually focus on reading at all. So according to the research, when these young people come in to teach, they have no clue on, about how to teach reading. And so they have to rely on their colleagues to show them the way. And if the colleagues are teaching in a particular way and it's not helping the children to become literate, to become functional readers, to become competent, proficient readers, then the young teacher is also going to use those same flawed methods, and those children that she's in charge of will also not progress. So according to the research, everything is sort of incidental. Nobody really paid much attention to telling us that reading is not a natural process. You must be taught, and we must find an approach or a method or a basket of methods to help us to teach reading. Okay. Maybe at this point, I don't see any other comments that's coming through, but I'll have to read that article again. But the one article said, spoke about the two different approaches to reading. And so they say and I think this is what schools are currently doing. They talk about the whole language approach when you teach reading. And I think we call it the balanced language approach. So that approach says, according to the research, what underpins that approach, the ideas that underpin that approach, is that you learn by reading more, and you learn to read by seeing words, and afterwards you become familiar, and in that way you will acquire better reading skills. So I think that is sort of like the foundation of that whole language approach. And so when this whole debate started about reading, and the research started showing that, phonics is actually a critical teaching approach that we must adopt, according to that paper that I read, then the whole language brought in some phonics teaching, but it didn't make phonics the basis of the early reading teaching. Okay? Yeah, I'm waiting to see if I've got more comments. What do you want to add? Anything else? So now the research is saying, and neuroscience is supporting that, is that we now know for a fact that reading is not a natural process. It's not automatic. That young children will have to be taught how to read, and that very complex function of transcribing the sounds that make the spoken word, transcribing that onto the page is very difficult for the children to decode. So we have to show them the patterns and the links, and in that way the children will start recognizing certain letter patterns and know what sounds go with it. Okay, that is sort of what I'm picking up from the research, and it makes a lot of sense to me, because I used the example of Inshona and Chona earlier. Now, take the surname Khadebe. It starts with an R, but we need to know that the R in isiXhosa is the sound. And I'm an adult, and I used the previous example as well. And so we need to know that that is the sound. So whenever I see something starts with an R in isiXhosa, I need to know, okay, that may not be the R as I understand it in English. I need to use that particular sound to go with that symbol, the R that I see on the page. Okay, it's quite a difficult topic to talk about like this, but I thought let's just kickstart the conversation and say, if our reading scores are so low, if almost 80% of the children when they get to grade 4 can't read, then what are we going to do about that? And how are we going to use the research, scientific, empirically proven research that says reading must be taught in a systematic way? Okay, I don't think I mentioned, but there are a few papers out there which says also that the leadership of the school must know how children learn to read. So the SMT must have knowledge about the reading acquisition process. And so that the implication is that if your SMT doesn't understand what the theoretical base for reading is, then the SMTs will have to help themselves. They'll have to get people to come and do some, give them some coaching, go on workshops, go on courses, do some reading about how do learners read. Because the SMT, the leadership of the school, is the one that must ensure that reading instruction takes place in a systematic way at the school, across the entire school, if we are serious about changing the literacy, the low literacy levels of our children. Okay? Yes, anything else? Taryn Lee for you says, reading to understand is also a challenge. Children must sometimes read only. Okay, I think we sort of touched on that. Any comments that you guys want to make about it, about the reading? The teachers, unfortunately, this is international, eh? Unfortunately, teachers were not taught how to teach reading. And that is problematic because all of us are in the classes and we really don't know how to teach reading effectively. Yes, we're reading about it and somebody's coming up with this theory and somebody's coming up with that practice, this methodology we must use, that approach we must use, and so forth. And there's no cohesive approach that can help us say, right, this is what we need to do and this is what we're going to implement at the school. Because the research is saying that the SMTs must ensure that there is that systematic approach to reading instruction at the school. And then teachers, we need to help the teachers, and we're not talking about the odd workshop. How are we going to help teachers understand the complexities of all the things I'm talking about here, because we've taught in a particular way, and it's not yielding results. And now the research is giving us a particular model that we can follow. Okay, that is why I'm suggesting you check out the NICSPOL articles on reading and all the current research they did. Just another some research that document that I read. It was a case study of, I can't remember, 60 schools form part of this case study, and the question that the researchers wanted to answer is, in which way does the leadership affect the learners' reading performance? So the researchers took a sample of 60 schools. They took schools, 30 of the schools were, they performed well. The reading scores were fine according to the ANA. And then they took, they had good scores, so they used the ANA as a basis to help them identify the schools. So they had 30 schools that performed well, and then they took another 30 schools that were average performers. And then they looked at the leadership practices at those schools, right? And then eventually they did some deep diving, and they took 4 of the schools from the 130, the sample of 30, the well-performing group, and they took another 4 from the other group. So they had 8 schools, and they went and did some deep drilling there to find out exactly those, according to their findings, those leadership practices were the practices that resulted in good reading scores for the schools. So they took the 8 schools and they wanted to see whether those leadership practices that were identified, whether those leadership practices were evident in the group of 8 schools. It's quite an interesting bit of research. And so I think one of the findings of the research is that the SMTs must take charge of the reading instruction at the school. The SMT has an obligation to see that the reading instruction happens. And another finding was, or recommendation was, that when we make appointments of HODs, we need to ensure that the HODs have a good grasp of, of the knowledge of reading. The person needs to have a good grasp of the curriculum, not only the content that appears in the CAPS books, but understand curriculum issues and understand reading and, knowledge of reading and how reading is taught. And on the basis of that, that should count in the person's favor in terms of appointment. Because you can't have people there who have no knowledge of how reading is taught, how children learn. SMTs must have a high level of understanding or knowledge of the curriculum. And that makes absolute sense to me. SMTs can't be disengaged from the curriculum. SMTs should be following all the research. And I think we mentioned that sort of in the job description. That most of the job descriptions we covered, the fact that teachers and HODs and the deputy principals, in all your job descriptions, it says you must be aware of all current research. So there's an obligation for all the people at the school to know what is the current research saying about how do we go about teaching reading. How should we do reading instruction at our school? Okay? And right, is that the end of the conversation? Mention a few things. What are you doing at your school and how are you achieving? How are you getting your children to perform well? How are you ensuring that your children are good readers? Let's hear from you so that the others who are on the talk can also learn from that. Okay? I think I'm sort of just talking, and nobody's really giving some input here. Okay, so I've given you what I've read about what the research is saying, and I think we need to put our heads together and say, right, if we'll have to read what the research is saying, I would suggest that SMTs and, take their staffs. SMTs can sit and study the research, share ideas, what is the research saying, and then share that, get the staff to interact with that research and see what you can extract from the research and how you can implement what the research is saying. Because you may need reading coaches, you may need people to help you mediate that information. How do you translate the research into practice at the school? Because we have to do something about our reading performance. We have to. We are obligated to help our children become competent readers. The whole world operates on print, right? It's our phones. You must be able to read. Computers, you must be able to read. All the science, all the information. The more technology we have, the further we're moving away from really the spoken language, and this world is becoming print rich. So if the children can't read and they can't understand what they are reading, we are placing them at a huge disadvantage. And so we are going to forever have this gap between the rich, the small percentage of rich, wealthy, well-educated, flourishing, prosperous group, and we're going to have the masses sitting here who's going to be stuck forever because they won't be able to communicate in the world that we're operating in. They won't be able to make their own decisions. They will be, they'll be denied. They'll have access to the knowledge, but the knowledge will be in print. So everything is out there. But if you can't read and you can't engage the printed text, it means that we are basically keeping those people locked. We're keeping the children locked. So how do we unlock that? And how can the research help us to unlock that? Okay? Yeah, very serious conversation. I'm really concerned, one as a teacher and secondly as a working class child. I understand exactly the challenges that poor people. Well, I try to understand, but I've also come from that background, so I know how difficult it is to try and claw your way through society. And today, it's even worse. And if we don't give them that reading competence, if we don't help them to gain that reading competence, we are going to keep them behind locked doors, guys. And that disturbs me. Well, and I'm sure it disturbs you as well, to know that it's as simple as unlocking children's potential to read with meaning. Because once we get them to read with meaning, they can take charge of their own learning. They'll be able to make sense of what they are reading, and we will be able to release them to start learning on their own. They'll take responsibility for their learning. But if they don't have the skills to read with meaning, if they can't comprehend, they can't understand the text, they can't analyze, they can't draw conclusions, they will not progress far. And we already see the evidence of that in our society. Okay? Yeah, so I'm preaching a little bit here. So maybe, okay, how's it going? Just give me a comment. How's the conversation going? Should we change tack quickly? Somebody just put something out there for us so that we can hear how you feel about this conversation. What have you got to add? I think our foundation phase teachers are under tremendous pressure because you are sitting with the young people, and all children must learn to read. They must learn to read by the time they get to grade 3. Because when they get to grade 4, they should be able to read to learn. So the basics of reading must be mastered by the time the children get to grade 3. And I know here in the Western Cape we have this read by 9, because that is the end when they get to grade 3. And so that is one of the goals here in the Western Cape. The challenge is, how are we going to achieve that? Because we've got the stats that says the current lot that went through from 2016 have gone about, 22% of them were competent readers, were proficient readers. They could read with meaning, they could understand what they are reading. But 78% of those kids went through, or so now sitting just higher up in the primary school, are already moving through the system with a lot of backlogs. So how are we going to arrest the situation? How are we going to stop that tide? What are we going to do? And it's going to take a lot of energy. It's going to cost us a lot of time, because we're going to have to learn these things. We haven't been taught how to teach reading. And we've been, like I said earlier, we've been taught certain approaches. We've been taught about guided reading and paid reading, and we've taught about sight, recognizing words and doing sight words, and we've got word walls, and we've got all those things, but they're all fragmented bits. How are we going to get them into a cohesive whole, basically? Okay? Right. Alfreda, you're not saying a word. What? No, you're not saying anything. I've got sort of language experts here on the chat. Okay? So if you guys are not going to give me any information, do I end at this point? Would it be a good thing? You just give me a shout out quickly to tell me, what can we, does it make sense that I'm talking about? Am I driving the point home that we're really going to have to look at how we are promoting reading instruction at our schools? I hope I've driven on the point that SMTs are obligated to ensure that there's a systematic, sustained program of reading instruction at the school across the entire school. And then, of course, I think schools need to look at the research and then, discuss what the research is saying and try to make sense of that, because I've just gave you some of the points that I've read. And it makes absolute sense to me. But you running the school, you teaching in the classrooms, you know what is happening there, and you know, I suppose, best how to interpret that information. Okay? Is there anything that you guys want to tell me? Or are we all on Workers' Day mood? I think maybe that's the point. Maybe I should wrap up at this point. Yes, as a teacher, I think it's important for us, that's why I like the part that we spoke about the job descriptions, because I thought, if there's one thing that came out very clearly, loudly and clearly to me when we were busy talking about the job descriptions, is the fact that the job descriptions are in fact saying, it's telling us we must do what the research is saying. So whatever the research is saying, your job description is also saying that you need to keep up to date with the research. You must see what approaches are out there, what are the techniques out there, what's the different thinking out there. And it must be scientifically proven research. It's not just somebody came up with a nice idea, right? And then as a school leadership, you must see how you can use that information to help you get our children to become good readers. Besides the reading instruction, yes, we must have our books in our classrooms. We must have the library. We must have that supportive environment. You must have a print-rich environment, right? In terms of books, in terms of text and things that children can read. It must be visible. They must be, they must see reading. They must see the books. They must be able to take the books at any point. It mustn't be behind locked doors and all that. They must be able to access the information so that if the mood strikes and they're motivated to read and they're eager to read, they must have the material there. So we must ensure that all those supportive, elements are in place as well. Like I said, books. We must ensure that we do vocabulary building with the children. We must ensure that we help them with spelling. Those are all things we must do. But the research is saying very clearly that all those supporting elements must be undergirded by teaching the children how to see the relationship between the spoken word and the printed word. In other words, there's a heavy emphasis, especially in the early grades, to teach the children how to read, okay, by learning the phonics. Right. So that's sort of what I have to say. Otherwise, I'm going to just repeat over and over. I've got like quite a bit of notes that I made, because I tried to make sense of all this stuff for myself, so that I could understand. It's very, very interesting. So I would just in summary say that we need to pay attention to what research is saying, right? We cannot participate in another international benchmarking assessment like the polls and come up with a similar outcome of having almost 80% of our learners being functionally illiterate. In other words, they can decode, they can see the words, they can probably pronounce it, but it doesn't go beyond that. It's just a robotic exercise. And that the research is saying we mustn't teach them only to decode, to just identify the word. Once they understand the relationship between what the word is, the meaning and the way the word needs to be understood must be linked. Okay, we can't just let them mouth those words. There must be meaning attached to it. And once the children understand how to read the words and what the words actually mean, eventually they will be able to make meaning of a string of words and get the meaning in a sentence, for example. And how excited children get when they understand what they are reading. So the research is going to help us do that. We just need to have the willpower as SMTs, as the principals. If the research is saying teach phonics, we need to read about it. If the research is saying that phonics must be the basis of our reading instruction, that's the way I understand it. We have to read about it. We must call in our subject advisors. We must call in experts that we know, reading experts, and ask them to help us mediate that information so that we don't just run off and do something. Okay, we have to mediate it. We have to understand what does the research actually mean by this, and then we need to implement that at our school. But having said all that, if a school doesn't prioritize reading instruction at the school, then we must take responsibility for our children's illiteracy. It's a hard one. Despite the fact that the children come from gangster-ridden areas, despite the fact that they are so poor that they rely on that plate of food that we give them at school, despite the fact that their parents are absent, the parents are not interested, the parents desert, our children, when they walk through our gates, guys, when they come into our schools, and when they come into our classrooms, we must ensure that we have a reading instruction program, a formal, logical, systematic reading instruction program at our school, and that we have all the reading material available. If there's nothing else, this is my view, if there's nothing else, and I told so many people this, if there's nothing else we do at school in terms of teaching, then everything else falls away if we do not get the reading right. So I'm challenging you out there that if you don't have a whole school reading instruction program at your school, that you guys start that discussion at your school, and that you as the principal, you as the SMT, you as the teacher advocate for that, and rather let us have the birthing pains of trying to make sense of how to teach reading. Because at the end of the day, if our children are going to excel, if our children are going to become literate young people, if they're going to become proficient readers, our hearts are going to sing. Okay? So, yes, on that note, I think I'm going to end because nobody wants to talk to me tonight. Nobody's saying anything. So, yes, thanks for allowing me just to mouth everything here. And I hope it's going to generate discussion at your schools. And then if you have comments or you think we need to get together and we need to, start these conversations in groups of schools, if you think we need to start this conversation in the districts, put it out there. If we're serious about taking our children out of poverty, let's start talking about reading and how we're going to formalize reading instruction, whether we are high school or a primary school. And particularly, of course, in our foundation phase, because if we need to change the reading instruction culture in our foundation phase, so that we know the next cohort of learners are not going to be that same group that we sent up, that 22% who's somehow going through the system now. The other 78% are probably, you've got them in your classes there. You know how they're struggling at primary school. Now, just imagine they must still go to high school. And the evidence is when our children struggle, they drop out of school. They drop out from grade 9 and grade 10. We have all these children just disappearing into down somewhere. We don't know where they are. They're invisible. We don't have the stats to say where they are because we can't track them in our colleges. We can't track them in any kind of formal program. They just disappear. And we're going to have to do something about it. So on that note, I want to say, have a good Workers' Day tomorrow. Have fun. And thanks so much for joining the session. And thanks always for investing in education. It's one of those callings We can't get away from it. Our hearts bleed. We struggle. We're human. We trying everything, but I know we won't give up on these kids. I know that. That's why you're here on the program, and that's why I'm talking here. So have fun tomorrow, and then we'll see whether we can have, whether we're going to continue with this conversation. I think we need to continue with the conversation at some point, but maybe next week we can just talk about, exchange the different types of books that we're reading, different research that we're reading, whatever we're doing. We're just going to keep it light and share some information. But hopefully you'll be able to let us know. I'm challenging you, starting soon, like in the next week or so. If you don't have a formalized, systematic, intensive, sustained reading instruction program at your school, I'm challenging you as an SMT member, as a teacher, to activate that at your school. And then, yes, we all build the plane as we are flying, but we know our focus is we want children who are excellent, proficient readers. Okay, so on that note, School Corridor says continue creating magic in your spaces, wherever you are, and just keep flying along those corridors. Cheerio.